questions. Maybe just to check, do you know anything at all about the Sámi people or reindeer herding? Little bit? Well, at least now you have seen a little bit more in the film. That's not my home region, it's his home region, and at least, well, I'm not speaking on behalf of you, at least one of the persons was your cousin, maybe even more. But Sámi people are an indigenous people in the Arctic. We are from the Finnish side. I'm from Inari, which is more to the east, and he's from this particular area. We both come from reindeer herding families, both own and work with reindeer every now and then, but we belong to the generation who have been sent to universities and even abroad, and we've been university educated, and then the idea is that then we go back and give back, and that's what I've done. I was in the business world for 6 years around the world, but then I moved back to my home village, Inari, and I am the head of the Yle Sámi radio and TV in Inari, and I'm on a study leave right now, studying at London School of Economics, doing a master's in media communications. So that's my background to start with.
Okay, so like Pirita told, the region where this document is filmed is a region where I'm originally from. My family works as a reindeer herder. My brother and my father, they work almost full time as a reindeer herder. I used to work with reindeer more when I was younger. I used to go to the like the reindeer has its own year, but the reindeer year starts during the May when the calves born, and during the summer times the calves get marked, and during the autumn time they are wandering freely in the wild mark, but usually in the early winter reindeer herder gather the reindeer herd to the this kind of inside these kind of fences, and then they separate the reindeer herd for a smaller stock, and then they also sell some reindeers for meat, for like food purpose, and reindeer continues in the springtime. The reindeer are in the wild mark, and the year goes round. And I've been, when I was younger, I was more with the practical reindeer herding work, but I chose to go to school and educate myself. I already have one university degree in political science, and now I'm starting my second degree in law. And I've been also working as a journalist, so I've been working as a newspaper journalist for the last 4 years. But I think that in this document they were like explaining about the problems what today's reindeer herders have, and the main problem is like it's the kind of like the competition between the other interests of states and private companies, and these kind of, like you saw that there were like plans from private companies to make a railroad inside the reindeer herders' pasture lands, and then of course the one of the biggest problems is the mine searching, or searching the iron in purpose to manufacture these kind of iron products. So these are very like dangerous things to the pasture lands. So and they are very, not only for the reindeer but for the whole environment. And if the environment isn't doing well, then the reindeer are not doing well. So it goes like that. So, but this was like the same problems are, I think, in many other places also, all over the Sámi-land. The Sámi-land starts from the southern part of Sweden and Norway, and it goes up to Finland, northern part of Norway, and to Russia, to Kola Peninsula. And all over the Sámi reindeer herders have these kind of problems, that there are other interest groups that want to use the land. And that has been for ages. And I think, I'm not sure if it came from this document that actually they were talking about state lands, but as I think, as a lawyer and as a Sámi person, if you go back to history, these lands have been Sámi people's land. They have used the lands, they have lived there, so they have owned the lands. And actually, it's not only that they have lived there, they have paid taxes from their lands. And there are like tax lists from until 16th century, which proves that those actually Sámis have had private ownership for those lands. But in some moment at time, the state just came and said that no, this is our lands, even if the state doesn't have any kind of like a legal ownership for those lands. It's just they are claiming. But if you look at the juridical perspective, there isn't this kind of legal ownership, as I understand it. But
are people in Finland aware of what's happening, like the situation?
Yes and no, I guess. There's a common stereotype about the Sámi people that we're always complaining and we're against everything. And that stereotype is getting worse and worse all the time, and it's reinforced by the Finnish media. I run the only Sámi media, and we're a tiny media, 20 people. And he used to be the only Sámi producer in the Finnish-speaking newspaper. So it's very hard for the Sámi people to tell the truth and to have their voice heard in the media and in the mainstream public discussion. And there are a lot of misunderstandings, disinformation, which is even put out there to make it more difficult for the Sámi people to live. And in my profession as the leader of the Sámi TV and radio, it has been very important for me to build a channel. Also nationwide, our TV broadcasts can be seen everywhere in Finland and in the Nordic countries as well, once a day. It's very important that we have a channel where the Sámi people can actually tell their side of the story and have their voice heard. And I think what is special about this documentary is that it brings together all these people who usually aren't speaking in the mainstream media. Not that often even on our channel. And the reason is that if you look at the Finnish map, they live here, and our office is here, and it's like 500 kilometers. So we don't often have the money to go there and make stories, or have the time, because there aren't that many of us. So there isn't a lot of information, proper information and facts about the Sami life and what is going on in the mainstream media. There are a lot of misconceptions and stereotypes. And I think this film brings an important voice to the discussion. And I'm glad that it's shown here in London today.
What is the population of Sami people in Finland?
About 10,000. So we're a tiny, tiny group. And the common misconception is that we are a minority language group, but that's of course not the case. We are an indigenous people, and we live in 4 countries. And when you are an indigenous people, it means a lot more than just being a language minority, because we have a history and a culture which is thousands of years old. And we're working really hard to try and preserve it. And there are a lot of people like us, young people who are educated. We could go anywhere in the world. I used to work with Merrill Lynch here in London, in the city, with Finnish industrials, with Nokia in its heyday. But we have chosen, a lot of us have chosen to go back and give to our own society, and that's also what we're trying to do.
So how, like, to what extent is there political representation? Because you talked about that your voice is not being heard a lot, but is there, like, in the political system, a way to do that?
That's a really good question. Maybe Oula-Antti could talk about that.
Yes, we have our own representation, and it's called Sami Parliament. There is in each country where Sami live, there is Sami Parliament. In Finland, in Sweden, in Norway, and even in Russia. And Finland, the Finnish law has recognized this Sami Parliament since 1995. So it's like 20 years ago. So we have like cultural autonomy, which is like if you have like full autonomy, like for example the Ahvenanmaa island, which is in the southern part, it's like you can decide like almost from everything. But we have cultural autonomy, which is that we can decide on issues which relate to our language and culture. And for that purpose we have elections where we can vote members to Sami Parliament. And in Finnish Sami Parliament we have 21 members. And we have elections each 4 years.
But unfortunately, the Sami parliaments in all of the countries where they exist, they are only a consultative body. So, like Anne-Risten was mentioning in the document, there are legal requirements to consult us in matters that have a big impact for our culture and for our livelihoods. But it's a consultation only, it's not binding, it's not a consent, free, prior and informed consent, far from it. It's only that they hear us. Sometimes the Sami parliament sends a paper, this is our opinion, and it's kind of, okay, the process is done, and then they just move on. And lately, unfortunately, in many cases, they haven't even heard us. So a lot of big choices concerning the forestry management in northern Finland, as well as the management of the biggest salmon river between the border of Finland and Norway, all the decisions, final decisions were made without consulting the Sami parliament. and this is a very worrying trend that it seems to be that it's going, the situation is getting worse, so even the consultations aren't always taking place.
So there are Sami people in Finland, Norway, Sweden, and Russia. I was wondering if the Sami people in these countries often interact with one another, and if they, kind of organize movements or activities or something. I'm wondering if this is a thing that happens.
Yes, we have very natural cooperation because we were there, and then came the borders. But the borders are trying hard to separate us, but we have a lot of everyday connections, of course. Our families are divided between different countries. Both of our roots go to Norway and Sweden. So, for example, my great-grandma was from the Norwegian side of the border, and they got married to the Finnish side. So we have a lot of connections through our families. Then a lot of people work in a different country. We have a lot of cultural organizations that work across the borders, and also political cooperation. So the Sami parliaments form a Sami parliamentary council that tries to work together. It's not a big influence in the national politics, but they are coordinating. And then we have a Sami council, which actually is the representative of the Sami indigenous people in the Arctic Council. So they have they actually have a formal representation there with the Arctic nations. So there's a lot of natural cooperation across the borders and also political cooperation. And young people are working more and more together. There are a lot of young people's associations. Also some very interesting resistance movements. You should check out Suopan Terror. It's a SUOAPAN terror. So it's a resistance movement which uses social media and internet a lot. They make kind of some versions of kind of mainstream posters, and they're very political. And that's a kind of pan-Sami movement. So they work across the borders. They also have a lot of performances, for example, in all the major Sami festivals that we have. A lot in the summer, they have organized all sorts of performances where they have shown resistance to the cultural appropriation of the Sami culture, or the non-consultations with the salmon river and things like that. It's very cool.
Are there Sami members of parliament within those 4 countries? So, like, for example, you've got your own kind of parliamentary procedures, but do you have Sami people on, like, the equivalent of the Finnish parliament?
No, we don't. We don't have a quota. Like the Åland island has a quota. So they have one member of the parliament in the Finnish parliament, but we don't have anyone. There was a whole big debate just a couple of months ago whether we should have someone.
Is that because people haven't put themselves forward?
There have been a lot of candidates, but they haven't been successful. It's hard to get through with 10,000 votes, and it's not certain that all Sami people are going to vote that one candidate. So it's very hard to get through unless you kind of adapt your agenda to be more kind of mainstream friendly, so to speak. Yeah.
One question. So you mentioned that the government's trying to make separations between the different Sami groups that are found in the different 4 different countries. What's that look like? Just because it seems it's a common problem to indigenous cultures. I just wonder how does that actually come out? How do you feel that that the government's actively try to create a separation or division?
Well, maybe I gave a wrong impression. I mean that there are examples like, for example, the Sami radio. So we have Sami radios and TVs in each of the countries, the Nordic countries. But we're tied to the public service and to the national public service in the country where we operate. Although it would make a lot more sense to have one big Sami radio and TV, which would operate in 3 or 4 countries, but now we're separated by the borders. And then also if you think about the school systems or the political systems, then we operate according to the Finnish system. In Norway they operate according to the Norwegian system. So it's not that kind of an active, how do I say it, activity or so to speak. Maybe I gave the wrong impression, but it is just that in practice the borders make our life and our cooperation quite difficult. Would you have something to add to that?
Well, one thing is that, for example, Sámi in Finland, we speak Sámi and Finnish. Sámi in Sweden, he or she speaks Sámi and Swedish. Sámi in Norway speaks Sámi and Norwegian. So it's like already the language, the language of the main population makes a little bit difficult for us to cooperate in some level. Of course, we have our own common language, but like it's like in each country. The main language is like it's like kind of like it's still separating the main languages in some level. It's hard to explain like shortly, but it's like
yeah. And then of course reindeer herding. You know, in the old days, a couple of 100 years ago, our families used to roam with the reindeer. We were nomads. My grandparents were still nomads. His dad's generation was still nomads. And before the borders were closed in the late 19th century, we could roam with our reindeer from what is now the Finnish side of the Sámi land freely to the Arctic coast, to the coast of the Arctic Ocean, which is now Norwegian land. But we can't do that anymore. So that's why we're trapped in these reindeer herding cooperatives that was depicted here. So that's one example, how the traditional livelihood, which was based on nomadic movement between a big area, like Andresten was explaining there, has been trapped into these kind of structures which were exposed on us by the Finnish state.
Yeah, it's like the pasture lands that, if you compare what it was like 150 years ago, and if you compare today, if I had a map, I could show you that how much the pasture lands have gotten smaller. Like if you compare it, like what was the situation about 150 years ago, and what is the situation today?
Can I ask,
Yeah.
just two things. So the natural migration route for the reindeer doesn't that impact the reindeer, because many migrations are migrating for a reason, to get specific foodstuffs and follow the weather. So if there's a border and they're not allowed to compete, what would be their natural, the full extent of their natural migration? Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Isn't that impacting the reindeer? And the second question is, I'm puzzled how the Finnish government cannot recognise you under ILO 169 as indigenous people when you're recognised in the United Nations as indigenous.
We're recognized in the Finnish constitution as an indigenous people, but Finland has not, after 25 years, been able to ratify. There's always a new excuse why they can't do it, and they keep coming up. But with the reindeer question, Oula-Antti is probably better
that's
to
true.
answer that.
That's true. Still, the reindeer, they in the springtime they are trying to go north, because it's like they're like natural like destinations. in the old times they went to north to the coast of the ice sea, and like they explained on the document, it's like it's there are no mosquitoes, and it's much more better for reindeer to be on the summertime. So they are still they, like the reindeer, if they could freely go, they would probably go to the mountains. But the fences are there, so. But for example, like when there is a winter that there is snowing very much, so sometimes the reindeer can like jump over when there is plenty of snow. So it's like even if there are fences, they in some situations they can go to the other side, but the reindeer herders, they herd the herd almost every day, so they won't let them go too far. So that's the idea of reindeer herding is that try to keep your stock like together, but not too close, but like that you can handle the stock.
Yeah. Who's been asking for a long time?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to give a shout out to the youth groups that you mentioned, because I'm Swedish and we were never taught anything about the Sami populations in school. There was never any sort of like information about it, but some of the youth groups have really good Facebook groups, so I recommend that like you Google around and find, because some of them have subtitles and they're really good, and yeah, they've done some amazing work on cultural appropriation, so I just wanted to recommend them.
Yeah, someone else. Yeah.
I was going to ask, what do you think would happen if, so the reindeers want to go north naturally, and there are these borders there, but what do you think would happen if one of the herders, for example, did just take the herd and take them north? Like, what, and has that been tried since these borders have been in place?
Well, the situation nowadays is that at the places where, for example, where my family used to go about more than 100 years ago, nowadays after the borders have closed, there are now new reindeer herders from the Norwegian side. So it's like there are reindeer herders there, but it's like after the borders and the border closed, it's get like a little bit mixed, like for example, the families that used to wander like this kind of way, they have moved to southern part of Sweden, and now they are herding there, or then they have moved to eastern part of Finland and they are herding, and now at the places where they used to go, there are now new families herding there.
So there's never a void.
Yeah.
So you know, the land that kind of has been freed by the border closings, it's been taken up to other users. So it will be kind of impossible to go there, I guess. And also the laws prohibit that.
In the old days, well, the people tried, even if there were the borders, they tried to go, but there was a sanction. They took 10% away from the whole herd. So if you had like, if I remember correctly, but if you had like 100 reindeers, they took 10 away if they, that was like kind of like taxation. Yeah, if they caught you. And that was too.
That's very risky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wondered, you talked about the Sámi language. Is there a risk of that dying out, or is it still very much practiced across the Sweden?
There are 9 different Sámi languages. We speak the biggest language, but even our language is in the danger of disappearing. I don't know how many speakers of our language there are. Maybe, I don't know, 10,000, 20,000. maximum.
Yeah.
But still, it's a very small language, and it would need so much more support in every way, in schools, in the kindergartens, in the media, literature, everything. So much more should be done. And then there are tiny little Sami languages that are really close to extinction, so it won't take long for a couple of the languages to die, unfortunately, unless there are big activities to support the languages. Yeah?
Kind of going off that note, I was wondering if in the documentary they said that there were some people, some young people in particular, who were moving to the communities and learning how to herd reindeer, but these aren't Sami people, correct? They're just the people who are moving to these communities. They're not.
They were referring to their youngsters.
Okay.
Either continue
And then
their family's traditions, and they were really proud of the young people.
okay.
There are also both young boys and young girls who want to stay and continue the tradition. And it is a tradition for all of us. We've been there, like you saw the little kids there, lassoing with the Sami lasso. We've been there, both of us, since we were very small. We were part of the reindeer work, and we were taken there both in the winter, when it's -40, or in the summer, we stay up all night and work with the reindeer. So children are working with the adults. Naturally, they're learning the tradition. But not everybody stays there. Like, we are an example. We didn't want to be reindeer herders, but for example, his brother is a full-time reindeer herder. My brother and my sister are more involved in reindeer herding than I am. There aren't that many new people coming in, except through marriages, but I think they were referring to the youngsters. There at the back.
I just watched a previous film about a Sami, more from a Norwegian section of the community. Was there anything to enforce assimilation in the past? Were people forced to renounce their Sami identity and take on other identities?
Well, the assimilation continues. It has never stopped. Everything, all the systems are geared towards the Finnish way of doing things, and Norwegian and Swedish. So everything, starting from the schools and everything's built on the Finnish culture. So there is a long history of assimilation, and it continues.
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
So sorry to...
Not to worry. Yeah?
There's Sami schools.
No. There are no Sami schools. So maybe one more. You've been asking. Yeah, you?
Well, it's about it's a comment but a question. So I understand that the neocortex in the mind is developed as the communities grow, and so communities being groups of people and friends and people that groups of humans have known each other for, and also animals. So my question is, if the herd is part of the Sami community, how big is the community if you feel like there is that relationship? Because when people and social scientists in my communities, they also have relationships to animals and deities as well as humans that they interact with. So I'm just curious, because right now the science is that it's capped at a certain level, but I think it comes from studies that neglect the indigenous, the relationships indigenous communities have with animals that they herd, and they have a sort of symbiotic relationship with. So how big would the community be if you'd include the herd in it?
Well, Sami people never reveal how many reindeer they have. So I can't answer that question. But maybe to give perspective, like you said, if the nature does well, then the herd does well as well. And then when there are bad years, then also the reindeer suffer. And when there's land grabbing and this competitive land use that is shrinking the reindeer herding land smaller and smaller, then it gets more difficult to live as a community. Okay. Did you want to add to that before we wrap up on it?
No, I do to add.
But thank you so much.